Hey guys, I'm back from my training op, and I have a lot of really interesting stories to share with you. I'm actually going to have to break them up into 2 separate updates because I haven't been able to write them all down yet. I'll start off with a few stories from Katie. She's a vet who's been a search and rescue officer for about 15 years now. She specializes in high elevation mountain rescues and is widely considered to be one of the best in her field. She was one of the more enthusiastic storytellers I spoke with over the week, and since we were together a fair amount during exercises, she ended up telling me about quite a few incidents that really stuck with me. She told me this first story when I asked her about traumatic calls she had been on. She shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently on the mountain since the potential for nasty accidents is much higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parks she worked for had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said, one of the worst on record as far as weather went. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some climbers. They warned people about staying on the mapped areas, but of course there's always a few who don't listen. In one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided he knew better than the officials and he took them out to an area that wasn't safe. Based on Katie's analysis, it seemed like they had been snowshoeing when they walked onto a shelf of snow that looked solid, but actually wasn't. It gave way, and the family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed on the rocks at the bottom, and the parents died instantly. One of the kids did as well, but the other 2 survived. One had a broken leg and fractured ribs. The other was almost unharmed, save for some bruising and a sprained ankle. The uninjured child left his sibling behind and set out to find help. Katie said the kid didn't make it more than half a mile before the storm overtook him. The kid ended up stopping to try to get warm, or maybe just to rest, and ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding the family with the help of some witnesses who saw them heading out into the wilderness, and she was the one to find the kid who had frozen looking for help. She said it had started to snow, just enough to obscure long-distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting in the snow up ahead, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described in detail how, as she got closer, she realized at first that it was a child, second, that they were deceased, and third, that they had frozen in one of the most pitiful positions she's ever found a corpse in. The kid was sitting upright with his knees tucked up against his chest. His arms were curled around him, and his head was tucked into his coat. When she moved the coat to look at his face, she saw that he had died crying. His face was twisted, and the tears were frozen on his cheeks. She said that it was painfully obvious that he was terrified when he succumbed to hypothermia, and as a mother, it broke her heart. She told me repetitively that she hopes the father is burning in hell as we speak. The other traumatic story she told me about that really stuck with me was one that happened when she was a rookie. Her team got a report of an experienced climber who hadn't come home the previous day. His wife was convinced that something bad had happened because he's never failed to come home before. They went out looking for him and had to climb what sounded like some very technically challenging parts of the mountain. They got to a relatively flat area, and Katie started to see blood in the snow. She followed the trail, and as she went, she started to see bits of tissue. She wasn't exactly sure what body part it had come from, but the farther she followed it, the more there was. She followed this blood and tissue trail to a sheltered area under a cliff face, where she finally found the climber. She said there was so much blood, more than she's ever seen before. He was lying face down, one arm stretched in front of him, as if he had died crawling. She looked closer and saw that he had been partially disemboweled, which must have been where all the tissue and blood she had seen came from. The guy had an ice pick tucked in his hip holster, and it was covered in blood. Of course, they'll never be sure exactly what happened, but she said as best as she can figure, this is what went down. The guy had been attempting to climb up to the next area and had been using his ice axe to ascend. He probably hit a loose patch and had fallen. On the way down, or possibly when he landed, he'd gotten impaled by the axe and it disemboweled him. He dragged himself along, tearing pieces of himself out as he went, and had died under the cliff face. She isn't terribly bothered by gore, but I guess a few of the guys who came to help her remove the body ended up getting sick when they turned him over, and a good portion of his intestines spilled out. I mentioned to Katie while we were talking that I was interested in hearing about any experiences she had with people completely disappearing. Her eyes lit up, and she leaned in close to me and asked if I wanted to hear about a real doozy. The story she brought up was something that got a lot of attention by the media when she was first starting out. A family had been berry picking in an area of the forest very close to the entrance of the park. They had 2 little boys, both under the age of 5, and at some point during the day, one of them vanished. There was an absolutely massive search, but they found absolutely nothing. It was another one of those cases where it was almost like the kid wasn't even there in the first place. The dogs just sat down and didn't pick up on anything. No trace of the kid at all. The search went on for about 2 months, but was eventually called off. Fast forward to 6 months later, the family came back to place flowers at a memorial that had been set up for the kid and brought their other son. While they were placing the flowers, they lost sight of the kid for about 3 seconds, and in that span of time, he vanished into thin air. Now, obviously, the parents were beyond devastated. It's awful enough to lose 1 child, but to lose 2 is beyond imagination. The search was huge, one of the largest in state history. There were about 300 volunteers combing every inch of this park looking for the kid. But again, there was no trace of him. The search went on for about a week, with people looking miles away from where he had vanished. And then, almost 2 weeks later, a volunteer almost 15 miles from the designated search area radioed in that he had found the kid. They all assumed he was dead, but the volunteer said he was not only alive, he was in good shape. Katie and her team went out to recover the kid, and when they got there, she couldn't believe it was the same kid that had been missing. His clothes were clean, there was no dirt on him anywhere, and he didn't appear traumatized or upset at all. The volunteer said he had found him sitting on a log playing with a little twig bundle that was bound together with some old rope. Katie asked him where he had been and who he was with for those 2 weeks, and the kid told her he had been with the Fuzzy Man. Now, Katie firmly believes in Bigfoot, so she got all excited and asked what he meant by fuzzy. Was he hairy? The kid said no, he wasn't hairy. He was a fuzzy man, and he went on to describe the man as blurry, like when you close your eyes but not all the way closed. He said the man came out of the trees and took him deep into the woods. He said he slept in a hollow tree, and the fuzzy man gave him berries to eat. Katie asked if the man was mean, if he scared the kid, but he responded, "No, he wasn't scary, but I didn't like how he didn't have eyes." Katie ended up just bringing him back to the headquarters for police to speak with him. During the conversation, the kid told the cops all about where he slept and what the fuzzy man gave him to eat. He said he was allowed to wander around one specific clearing, but whenever he tried to go further, the fuzzy man would get mad and yell real loud, even though he didn't have a mouth. Whenever he got scared at night, he said the fuzzy man made it go brighter and gave him the twig bundle. He said the fuzzy man wanted to keep him, but had to let him go because he wasn't the right kind. He either couldn't or just wouldn't elaborate more on that point. The cops were left scratching their heads, and they renewed the search for his brother, but again, with no results. The kid had no idea where his brother was, and they never ended up finding him. The last story that Katie told me was about something that happened to her when she got separated from her training group when she was still a rookie. They were learning the basics of high elevation on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the bathroom. She went off about 50 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. I'll tell the rest exactly as she told it to me. So I go to take a piss, and once I'm done, I start going back to the group. But I've only gotten about 5 feet when I realize I have no idea where I am. And this isn't I got turned around kind of lost. I mean, I literally had no fucking clue where I was. If you'd asked me, I don't think I'd even know what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia feel, you know? You're completely lost and you have no idea what to do. So I stood there for a while just trying to figure out where the fuck I was and what I was supposed to do. But the longer I stood there, the more confused and turned around I got, so I just started walking. As I recall, I just picked a random direction and went for it. And I'm walking, and it's just getting worse and worse to the point where I have no concept of why I'm on this mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through the snow, and then I start hearing this voice. It's kind of inside of my head almost. Like if a frog could talk, all low and croaky, and it's telling me over and over, it's okay, you just need to find something to eat. Find something to eat and you'll be okay. Just keep walking and find something to eat. So I start looking around for anything that I can eat, and I swear to God I've never felt that hungry in my whole life. It was bottomless. I think I would have eaten just about anything you put in front of me right then. I had no concept of time, so I had no idea how long I'd been out when I hear an actual voice coming towards me. I go toward it and I see one of the SARs. He looks fucking terrified. He's running towards me, asking if I'm okay and what the hell I'm doing out here. And the scary thing was, as he's running towards me, I kind of see myself reaching into my belt for my hunting knife. I'm not even really thinking about what I'm doing, but all I'm thinking about is that I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'll never be okay again, so I just have to eat. He sees me reaching for my belt and backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away, that he is not going to hurt me, and that kind of snaps me back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am, and I put the knife away. I run to him, and I ask him how long I've been gone, thinking he'll tell me I've been gone for like half an hour or so. But he ends up telling me I've been gone for 2 fucking days. I've gone over 2 peaks and ended up almost on the other side of the mountain. And if I had kept going, I would have ended up wandering into about 300 miles of wilderness. They never would have found me. He can't believe I'm not dead, and of course, I don't know what the fuck to think. To me, no time had passed at all. I don't say anything. I just go back to him to a rendezvous point, and I'm taken back to HQ to be airlifted to the hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests, try to figure out what happened. As best as they can guess, I had some kind of weird fugue state, which is kind of like amnesia, or a weird seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is that we really don't know. It never happened again, but I'll tell you, ever since then, I never go out there alone. People rag on me all the time for making them come with me when I have to leave the group, but I just tell them that listening to me piss in the snow is better than losing me for 2 fucking days on a freezing mountain. The next person I talked to was EW, a former trainer who now works as an EMT. He still comes to ops like this to help out, but doesn't work full-time for us anymore. He used to specialize in finding lost kids. He just seemed to have a sixth sense for it when it came to knowing where they'd gone. Honestly, he's a legend amongst the more senior vets, but he gets embarrassed if you compliment him on his work. He sat down with me at dinner one evening, and we ended up swapping stories for a while. Most of them were just casual, but when we got on the subject of our weirder calls, I mentioned that I had a buddy who had gone up a set of stairs. He got kind of quiet and asked me if I'd heard a story about a little boy who had disappeared from his park a few years back. I hadn't, so he told me this story. They were looking for this 11-year-old boy, Joey, who'd gone missing near a river. Of course, the first thought is that he'd fallen in and drowned, but when they brought the dogs out, they led SAR officers away from the river and up to a very densely forested area. When we do searches for people, we search for them in a grid pattern, and we search every box of the grid incredibly thoroughly. What EW's team noticed right away, though, was that a very strange pattern was emerging. Dogs in alternating boxes were picking up Joey's scent, but losing it when they overlapped with another box. If you think of it like a checkerboard, Joey's scent was being picked up in random black squares, but never in red. This, of course, didn't make any sense. How could the kid bounce from area to area without leaving a scent in each place he passed? EW and his partner passed into a new box of the grid, and EW noticed a set of stairs about 50 yards away. He told his partner that they needed to go check near it, but his partner flat out refused. He told EW that he's made it a point to never go near any stairs he sees. He told him he'd wait in sight while he checked it out, though. EW told me he was irritated, but he felt for the guy and didn't push him on the subject. I walked over to the stairs. They were small, kind of like the stairs into a basement. I don't really feel strongly one way or another about them, the stairs, I mean, so I wasn't scared or anything. I guess I'm like everyone else, I just prefer not to think about them too much. Anyway, I went over and I could see that there was something lying on the bottom step, sort of curled up. My heart sinks because, of course, you always hope for the best. And we were confident that we'd find this kid alive. He'd only been missing for a few hours. But I knew right away that it was him and that he was dead. He was curled up in a little ball on the step, holding his stomach. It looked like he had been in horrible pain when he died, but I didn't see any blood, except for some on his lips and chin. I radioed in that I found him, and we got his body back to command. That poor family, they were devastated. The parents couldn't understand how he could be dead. He'd only been gone for such a short amount of time. And on top of that, we didn't have any obvious cause of death, which just made things worse. I figured he'd probably eaten something poisonous since he was holding his stomach when I found him, but I didn't want to take any guesses. It's hard enough to hear that your kid is dead, let alone having some stupid SAR guy guessing what happened. They took him away, and I went home and tried not to think about it. I hate finding dead kids, man. I love this job, but it's one of the reasons I left. I've got 2 daughters. The thought of losing them that way just... He choked up a little here. I'm not great with emotional stuff like that. It's always sort of awkward to see a grown man cry, so I didn't know what to do. He pulled himself together, though, and he kept going. We don't always hear back from the coroners about the cause of death. It's not really our job to know, I guess, and sometimes if they think it's foul play, then they can't tell us because of legal bullshit. But I've got a friend who works in the sheriff's department, and he'll usually pass along any interesting info if I ask. In this case, though, I actually got a call from him about a week later. He asked if I remember the kid, and of course I do, and he says some seriously weird shit is going on. He tells me, EW man, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but the coroner has no idea what happened to this kid. He's never seen anything like it. My friend goes on to tell me that when the coroner opened him up, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The kid's organs were like Swiss cheese. Quarter-sized holes were punched clean through every single organ this kid had, aside from his heart and lungs. But his colon, stomach, kidneys, even one of his testicles were full of these clean holes. My friend said the coroner described it as if someone had taken a hole punch and punched holes out of everything. They were so neat. But the kid didn't have a scratch on him. No entry or exit wounds. The closest anyone there had ever seen like it was a guy who filled himself full of buckshots a year or so back while cleaning his rifle. No one had any clue what possibly could have caused it. My friend asked me if I ever heard anything like it, or if we had any similar cases in the past, but I'd never even heard of something like that. As far as I know, the coroner determined the cause of death as something like massive internal bleeding, but no one knows what really happened. I've never been able to forget that kid. I've had nightmares about it sometimes. I don't let my kids go out in the woods alone, and when we go together, I never let them out of my sight. I used to love it out here, but that case, along with a couple others, just sort of ruined it for me. Dinner was over at that point, so we started to clean up and go back to our cabins. Before we went our separate ways, he put his hand on my shoulder and gave me a serious look before saying, "There's bad things out there. Things that don't care if we have families or lives or that we can think and feel. Be careful." Then he walked away. I didn't get a chance to talk with him again, but that story definitely stuck with me. By pure coincidence, I got to talk to another vet, PB, who's been in the SAR field for years. We partnered on a grid sweep during a training exercise, and we were chatting casually about how we liked the job, what kinds of things we've seen, and the like. At one point, we passed an old set of stairs, though these were probably from an old fire lookout, given the area we were in. I sort of casually mentioned that I was curious about the stairs, and that I wished I knew more about them. He got kind of quiet and looked like he wanted to tell me something, but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he told me to turn off my radio. Obviously, this is something we're never, ever supposed to do, but I did it, and he did the same. Then he started his story. About 7 years ago, I was out on a call with a rookie. We were in an area of the park that's had a lot of strange reports and events. Disappearances, stories about lights in the forest, odd noises, things like that. The rookie was totally spooked, kept going on and on about things in the woods. The guy would not stop talking about the goat man. Just on and on, goat man this and goat man that. Finally, I told him there was plenty else to be afraid of out here that was very real, and he better get over this thing with the goat man. The rookie wanted to know what kinds of things I was talking about, and I just told him to shut up and walk. We crested a little ridge, and there was a staircase about 10 yards ahead. The rookie stops, dead in his tracks, and just stands there looking at him. I tell him, "See, that's something you should be afraid of." The rookie asked me what the hell these are doing out here, and for some reason, I just open up and tell him the truth. Or what I've been told is the truth. I could have gotten a lot of trouble for doing what I did, and I could get in a lot of trouble for repeating it to you. But you're a nice kid, and I want you to stop looking into this. Quit while you're ahead. So I'll tell you what I know, under the condition that you never breathe a word of this to the soups. I told him I wouldn't say a word, and he double-checked that our radios were off before continuing. When I first started out, we were a little less tight-lipped about them, and all the other things that happen out here. We warned people before they were even hired that there's some weird shit going on. I guess the Forest Service was tired of having such a massive turnover rate, and they wanted people to know what they were getting into. So they started having people sign these agreements that they wouldn't go to the media about what they were going to see. The FS didn't want to scare people away, so the last thing they needed were spooked rookies running off to the media with stories of ghosts and haunted stairs or whatever. Eventually, though, they found that the agreements weren't necessary. People not only didn't want to talk about what they saw, they wouldn't. There were a few times where media tried to talk to people when kids or hikers would disappear. No one would say a word. I can't really explain it. I guess we just don't really want to admit that anything is wrong. This is our job, to be out in the woods every single day. We don't need to be spooked. The best way to avoid that is to pretend like everything's fine. So I'll tell you everything I can think of, and after that, I'm done talking about it, for good. and I expect you not to bring it up around me. Ever. The stairs have been out here as long as the parks have existed. We have records going back decades describing them. Sometimes people go up them and nothing happens. Other times... Look, I really don't like talking about this, but sometimes really bad shit happens. I saw this one guy get his hand sliced clean off when he got to the top step. He reached out to touch a tree branch, and it happened so fast. 1 second, his hand was there. The next, it was gone. Completely clean wound. We couldn't find his hand, and the guy almost died. Another time, a woman touched one of the stairs, and a blood vessel in her brain exploded. Like, literally exploded like a fucking water balloon. She sort of stumbled down the stairs and came over to me, and all she could get out was, "I think something's wrong with me." She dropped like a sack of flour, dead before she hit the ground. I'll never forget the way the blood leaked into the inside of her eye. Before she died, I watched it turn red. I watched it happen, and there wasn't a single thing I could do to help. We warn people not to go anywhere near them, but there's always at least one idiot who does. And even if nothing bad happens to them, something bad always happens. Kids go missing as we're on their trail. Someone dies the next day, cut in half in a completely safe part of the park. I don't know why, but something bad always happens. I don't exactly know why they're out here, but it doesn't matter. They're here, and if we're smart, we tell our new officers exactly what they're capable of. We were both quiet for a little while. I was afraid to talk because I wasn't sure if he was done. He looked like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he spoke up again. "Have you ever noticed how you can't find the same ones twice?" I nodded, expecting him to continue, but he just stayed quiet, walking along beside me. Eventually, he started a story about the biggest deer he's ever seen in the park. I didn't bring up the subject again, and I didn't press him for any more stories. He dropped out of the op the next day. Apparently, he left before the sun came up, said he was sick. None of us have heard from him since he left. I'm gonna stop here for the time being. I'll try to post the next part in the next coming days, but what with it being the end of the summer, things are pretty busy here. Thanks for the continued interest, guys. It's cool to know that we're all curious about this.